Recording in progress.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of a Wild Time Podcast with Adam Newsom. And I can't thank you guys enough for the support, the shares, the likes, the subscribes. Thank you guys. There's a lot of guys there. Thank you all for tuning in to my last episode, which was with UFC veteran, MMA legend, UFC pioneer Guy Mezger. Very, very positive response to that episode, which brought me to my next guest for tonight's podcast. And I'm very excited about this. Before I introduce this dude, his story will have you crying, and I'm a grown man. It will have you crying, and then it will have your heart full of joy. Because, ladies and gentlemen, joining me tonight on a Wild Time Podcast, fighting out of Benjamin, Minnesota, former UFC middleweight gladiator, veteran of UFC 2, ladies and gentlemen, Fred Ettish. Fred, thank you so much for being on here tonight, man. I've actually got to know you a little bit the last couple of years. You support the Bears Den, which is my little gym I got going here helping kids out. Sent you a shirt out, and you wore that, and it meant a lot to me, by the way. I sure appreciate that. Man, what a story you got, Fred. You are one of the most inspirational guys, in my opinion, not just mixed martial artist, but when you break it down in athletes. I mean, what you went through, which was nonsense, because me and you both know as fighters, if you've got the guts to walk inside an octagon or a cage or a ring and put it on the line, that alone, you're a winner. I mean, in my opinion, you're a winner. So
I appreciate that nice introduction. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. And I shared your video. You had a video that had been put out a few years back. I shared it today to get everybody familiar with the story. Dude, I can remember being in fourth grade, watching UFC 2. It was actually the first UFC that I had ever watched. I was in fourth grade, and it was
Me too.
one of the more brutal events that they had ever had. And Fred, I'm going to let you tell us about yourself right now, and I'll shut up and tell us what you've been into, my man.
Well, nothing real exciting. I live a fairly quiet existence. I train every day. I work out, try to keep myself as young as I can. I'm not old, but I've been around a long time, so I'm doing the best I can to be able to keep doing things that nobody should be able to do at almost 67 years of age.
Good grief.
Just one of those things. It's in your blood or it's not, and it's been in my blood for a long time.
Man, that alone, 67 years old. And look at you, man. You, martial artist. Now, let's forget mixed martial artist. You, first and foremost, was a martial artist. Before the UFC even began, was it Kenpo that you were involved with? Was that your main discipline?
It's an Okinawan style of karate that has the name Kempo in it, but it's Okinawan karate. I still do it every day.
Man, I'll tell you what, we'll go back. There's 2 fights in your career, right? 2 mixed martial arts events that happened.
Yeah, I'm the opposite of Guy Metzger. I started listening to that podcast here a little bit ago, and Guy was talking about all the experience he had in professional fights and the different styles of fighting that he did, and that's real admirable. And Guy is a person that I respect very highly. But I only had 2 professional fights.
Well, one of the coolest aspects of that interview last night with Guy Mezger was, I knew we would start talking about the fighting and the UFC and the Pride Fighting Championships and everything, but to get to know him as a human being last night and let everybody see what a great guy this was. I mean, he was genuine. You could tell. And that, to me, is why I'm excited to do this one tonight, too, because your story, like I said, man, it's one of the most inspiring. And I've been around the sport since I was 10 years old. When I was on a trampoline pretending to be Ken Shamrock fighting an imaginary Hoist Gracie. All you guys were guys that I imagined that I was. Fred Ettish, Keith Hackney, Chemo. I mean, those guys. I mean, Pat Smith, just the old school. So to have you on here tonight to tell your story, I mean, was you an alternate in that? Because let's go back. UFC 2, it was in Denver, Colorado, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
The alternate, didn't someone get hurt and they came to you?
Yeah, I had never even heard of UFC 1 until after the fact, and one of my students came into the dojo and he handed me a copy of Black Belt magazine and said, hey, he says, you need to look at this, you should be involved in this. And I read up on it, and I saw this little skinny Brazilian dude named Royce, and of course, Royce, but in my ignorance at that time, it was Royce. He won the whole thing, and he won $50,000, and I read that there was really basically no rules involved, and it appealed to me because I had been involved in some karate tournaments that had limited contact rules, and I found those things to be unrealistic. Didn't enjoy them at all. There was really no clear way to win something like that. I wanted something that was more real, more raw, and would let two fighters go out there and fight and be two fighters, and one person would win and one person would lose. And there's no debate. Back in those days, there was no judges, no referees. So you knew that somebody was going to walk out of their winner, and you couldn't argue about it. So I wrote a letter on a typewriter, because back in those days, that's what we had. We didn't have a lot of computers back then yet. I wrote to Art Davey, asked him if I could be considered as a participant. He wrote me back and said thanks, but no thanks, basically, because he had all the fighters that he needed, and he would take a look at me for a UFC down the line. And less than 2 weeks before the event, it was on a Saturday, I got done teaching my martial arts class, my karate class, and went out to lunch with my group and came back, and there was a message on my answering machine, and it was Art Davey, and he said, hey, one of the people in the main draw got hurt, and I had to move an alternate up into the main draw, and I want you to come down and be the alternate. I got back a hold of him and told him, yeah, I'd love to do it. And I asked him specifically, because I remember I had read in UFC, about UFC 1 in the magazine, that the two alternates got to fight. And I said, hey, well, I at least get to fight the other alternate. He said, no, he said, this is a 16-man tournament, and the other one was just an 8-man tournament. It's on pay-per-view, and we're not going to have time. So he said, the only way that you're going to get to fight is if between now and fight night, if somebody doesn't show up or somebody gets hurt or gets sick. And I said, okay. I said, I'll come down anyway. So I went down there. I was the alternate, one of two alternates. And it turned out that it was Ken Shamrock who had broken his hand, and he got pulled, or he pulled himself out when he broke his hand, and they moved Johnny Rhodes, who was an alternate, into the main card. And of course, I ended up fighting Johnny Rhodes, which is another little bit of irony involved in all of that. But anyway, I came down, went to Denver Thursday night. It was a Friday night show. Thursday night, everybody had showed up. Art Davey comes up to me, he says, hey, he said, thanks for coming down. We got everybody here. The show is good to go. You're not going to be fighting. You get to come watch the show and have a good time. And I said, all right. So we went to the show. Nobody had mentioned that, hey, maybe somebody's going to get hurt but win. And in that case, we're going to take the alternate and put him in there. And this was never discussed. At least nobody discussed it with me, because I remember Art specifically told me Thursday night, you're not going to fight. Thanks for coming down. We'll bring you back for another one. And I was helping Art. It was real chaos because it was at the Mammoth Event Center, which was a real pit. And it was in kind of a bad part of town. And they didn't have enough dressing rooms for everybody to use at the event center, so they rented a hotel across the street. And fighters were scattered all over the place. And Art's pulling his hair out, and he says, hey, he says, you got to help me. He says, you know the fighters, you know who they are. I want you to find them. I'll tell you who to find. You go get them, bring them up here to the staging area so I can get them down to the cage on time, because we got to keep this thing moving because we're on pay-per-view. I said, yeah, sure, I'll help you out. So I'm doing that. I'm running people back and forth. And I just brought up Minoki Ichihara, who was the guy that Hoist fought in the first round. And I was going back to find, I can't remember who it was next. And I'm going down the stairs, and Horian Gracie's coming up the stairs. And he grabs me by the arm, and he goes, are you ready to fight? I went, what? And he goes, are you ready to fight? He said, Thaddeus Luster, he hurt his, Fred Comaker hurt his hand. He was fighting Thaddeus Luster, and he can't continue. He won, but he can't continue. I need you to fight. And I said, okay. And so we had to go round up the two guys that I had with me. I had to get my gi, because that's what I fought in, and find a place to warm up in amongst all that chaos. And the next thing I knew, I was in the cage.
Man, that is crazy. You just answered my question, because the next question I had for you was, what was the atmosphere like backstage?
Chaos.
And that's what I was going to say. I had no clue that you were basically working the event.
Yeah, I was
when you were. That's a heck of a story in itself, right there, man. You were working the event. Horian Gracie grabs you and asks if you're ready to fight. Next thing you know, you're scattering, trying to hit mitts probably, and get stretched out and everything before you walk out. And let's be honest, people can say what they want. Johnny Rhodes was a tough dude.
Oh yeah, Johnny Rhodes was bigger, stronger, and obviously that night he was better. He gave me a good ass whooping, and there's no two ways about it.
There was no quit in you though, Fred, and that's one thing about that is, think about this. I mean, this is coming from me. You took the punches. You never. I mean, you went in there in history, and to me, you proved yourself, because, as I said earlier, people that want to run their mouth and stuff, they don't have the balls to go in there. I mean, a lot of people don't. So just going in there and taking punches like that, man, in a situation that is new, that don't happen to any of us. I mean, and what we're leading up to is Fred went out there and lost to Johnny Rhodes, and like I was saying, Johnny Rhodes at UFC 2 was a really high skilled fighter. I mean, he had good hands. He was a big strike. He was probably outweighed you, what, Fred? Probably 35, 40 pounds.
I think he was like 215-ish, and I was about 175.
It's about what I thought. So, I mean, at that time, there was no weight divisions. There was no rules. This is a different era. People don't realize it. I mean, I'm hoping this gets across to the younger generation that is into UFC, mixed martial arts, and everything. Things back in that time were nothing like they were now.
No, it was a completely different animal. The first good shot that Johnny hit me with, he hit me over my eye, and my eye went completely white. I couldn't see anything. It was like trying to look through a glass of milk. And I only remember pieces of the fight. I don't remember the whole thing. I remember pieces of it. I remember going down, and my eye was all white. I couldn't see, and I remember I was wiping it, because I was, then I remember thinking to myself, well, you dumbass, blood's not white, so what are you wiping your eye for? Well, then I thought I had a detached retina, because, the eye was completely shot. And so I was trying to buy a little bit of time and try and stay covered up, and Johnny did his job. He didn't give me the time, and it wouldn't have worked anyway, because I didn't get my vision back till about 2 hours after the fight. And so,
well, I read that you said basically once you got in there that as an athlete you checked out.
Oh yeah, my brain went boom, and
Fred,
I was not. I wasn't a person with a background like a Guy Metzger. I had not been in front of crowds. I'm an introvert. I'm not a person who brings out his best in front of people. It's off-putting for me. So I really stepped out of my comfort zone, which was what I intended to do. I wanted to step out of my comfort zone. I wanted to challenge myself. I wanted to find out, you know, a little bit more about who I was. And what better way to do that than to go completely out of your comfort zone, put yourself in a dangerous situation, and see what happens.
Well, and that you did, my man. I mean, you were part of history. That even, and like you said, the people that were on online forums and stuff. I mean, what, looking back, it makes me mad, because there's a warrior spirit in fighters, man. And I believe if you got some guys that want to play fighter, they don't train, they go in and it's all about a show. But if you know in somebody's heart that they're going out there to compete because they want to do it, they want to prove to themselves, like you said, you wanted to step in and do something new, then all it is trolls, I guess you would call them. But take us after that fight. I mean, I read that you went through some pretty traumatic stages after that.
Yeah, the event itself was traumatic for me, obviously because I did so poorly. I was very, as hard as everybody was on me, and people were terrible. It was awful. The amount of comments, and like you say, it was all anonymously. It was all from behind a screen, from umpteen miles away. Not one real fighter ever confronted me in that kind of a way. It was all trolls, as you say. and when you go out there and put yourself out there, and it was just barely over 3 minutes of my life, and I was judged on that 3 minutes and that poor result, and the attacks were so personal and relentless. It was a good 12 years before it finally flipped, and when it flipped, it was like a switch. All of a sudden, people became very respectful and very kind and very understanding. And the whole thing to me was mysterious, because I lost and I didn't do well, and nobody was harder on me than I was as far as my performance goes, because that's the way I'm built. I set a high bar for myself. I set a standard for myself that is, maybe it's unrealistic, but if you don't set the bar high, how do you ever improve? If you set the bar low, that's where you stay. You've got to set the bar high. And I didn't attain what I wanted to attain, and it was on the cover of magazines. It was on the box cover of the VHS cassette. It was very difficult for me as a man and as a person with some pride in himself. And when I say pride, I don't mean egotistical, because if anything, I'm the opposite. I've got a problem with my self-image and my ego, and I kept getting beaten down by all this. I'd get phone calls, I'd get letters in the mail, I'd get messages on my machine. When I finally got email, I started getting emails. I found out about a website, chat rooms, and on it went. And that the fight was in 1994, and in 1996, my son died. I had a son that was a full-term pregnancy. Everything was tip-top, no warning signs. His mother and I are not together anymore, but she did absolutely nothing wrong. She did everything right. She exercised. She didn't smoke. She didn't drink. She took care of her nutrition. She did all her prenatal stuff. She did everything as perfect as you can do. And all of a sudden, when she was in a hard labor, and I'll never forget it. The doctor who was delivering her just very quietly said shotgun, and everybody started scattering, and shit was flying everywhere. And they had her on a gurney, and we're going down to the OR. And I had been watching the baby's heartbeat. My son's heartbeat was going up and down, and he would have to stop and let the heartbeat come back up. And then when he said shotgun, we hit the door running. And I had told my wife, I said, I'll be with you through this whole thing. And when we got to the door to the OR, I had to make a choice because the doctor said, no, this is where you stop. And I was going to push my way through there, and there wasn't a soul on this earth that was going to stop me if I decided to go. But at least I had enough sense to know that if I made a scene, I'm going to delay everything and make things worse. So I stayed out. And he didn't make it. He was a full-term baby. I held him. He was perfect. He was handsome. I kept waiting for him to wake up. I walked around and held him, waiting for him to wake up. And of course, he never did. And it made no sense. How could this be? And in the midst of all of that, leading up to that, and then after that, it seemed like when I was really down, that's when the stuff from the UFC 2 fight would spike and would get worse too. And it was like this big weight just kept trying to push me down and hold me down and grind me out and make me quit. And I'm trying to hold myself together, trying to do what I could do to help my wife at the time, and try and, go to work, do everyday things, that you have to do. And it was overwhelming. It was just, and then you have all your other stuff. Everybody's got problems. I don't want to sing the blues here. I mean, life's not easy for a lot of people and that, but it just seemed like it just piled on, and things it never seemed to let up for years.
And now there was a stigma around mental health with men almost for the longest time. It's like men weren't allowed to be down or have, and I think that's why a lot of anxiety, man, a lot of panic attacks, a lot of this and that goes on because you're supposed to be strong, and it's all right, man. It's all right to not be all right. And
yeah, well, the one of the key ingredients for me to be all right was martial arts, because that was the one place I could go where I could sink myself into totally. I could release everything inside of me, and I was surrounded by people who cared about me and who were I was the head of the dojo. I was the sensei, but my students carried me through that. They probably don't even know, but they carried me through that because I was able to at least as long as I was in a gi in the dojo, training, teaching, I had to focus on that. And it gave me a release, and it gave me a break from everything else. And sometimes just a little bit of a break is just enough to get you through and make it to the next time. So
amen, man. And I've been following you, dude. Ever since I found you on Facebook a few years back. You've got your students, you've got your dojo. I mean, it's really, really inspiring. Did you not get with Pat Milich also? Is it when you started getting the itch back to maybe say, hey, listen, I've got some stuff still in that I ain't finished yet? I mean, because this comeback that's brewing, when did it start brewing inside of you? Because that's one of the best stories, period, man. I don't care who it is. If you know the Fred Ettish story, and somebody put a great video out that you did, an interview, and they explained everything, and I'm telling you, man, it's one of it tugs at your heart, no joke.
Well, the itch to get back in there started as soon as I got my eyesight back after UFC 2. I mean, I had it the whole time. I kept trying to. There was a couple of times I tried to come back. I tried to go to the Ultimate Fighter, that Clyde Gentry III. He was part of that. And Clyde is a guy that was really super good to me. He was one of the first journalists that really gave me a fair shake. He wrote a nice piece about me in his book. And he was involved in a magazine called The Ultimate Athlete, is what it was called, The Ultimate Athlete. And they had a couple of shows, and I tried to get on with his. He asked me to come fight, and that didn't work out. And it seemed like it was another one of those things where every time I tried to do it, something kept getting in the way. But it was an itch that I had, and I tried to ignore it. I tried to stuff it, and it just wouldn't go away. And so when I hooked up with Pat, it was obviously it was already in there, because I think it was like I'd known Pat a little bit, but I think it was 2006 when I first started cultivating a good relationship with him. And he had a program at the time where he had affiliate schools scattered around. And I'd been out to his place and trained a little bit and visited some. And I went out there for a week for the certification course, where they put us through Hell Week, basically. The way he described it, it was the same training that his pro fighters did 2 weeks out from their fight, which is their hardest week. And hard sparring, hard rolling, running hills, kettlebells, all kinds of conditioning. And I became an affiliate instructor for Pat, and I've always been a fan of Pat's. Obviously, as a martial artist, as a mixed martial artist, and as the type of man that he is. He's a guy with tons of integrity. He's very honest and open about who he is. As far as the martial arts go, he was extraordinary in mixing everything together, the wrestling, the boxing, the kickboxing, the submissions, and created, the best team in the world there for several years.
Yeah, that's a fact, because I think you're...
And I've always been very grateful to Pat for allowing me to be at least just a small part of that, and accepting me the way he did, because, my name didn't always carry with it a lot of positivity. But Pat, I told him straight up when I asked him if I could, become an affiliate. I said, I'll understand if you say no. I said, because, there's a stigma attached with my name. And basically he said, to hell with that. I don't care. He said, I'd love to have you on board. And so, I'm always grateful to Pat. I never forget Pat. I still try and keep in touch with him sometimes. And the training with Pat and at his gym really stuck with me, and I incorporated and still do a lot of the types of things and some of the very same things that he taught us. And for a while, I had a fairly good amount of students and a pretty active fight team, and that's all kind of fizzled out. I've only got a couple of guys now, but I train them basically the same way, because I just so totally believe in his system. And he really influenced me, and I'm always grateful and give Pat all the credit in the world.
Yeah, in 06, 07, Milich Fighting Systems was on top of the world in MMA. I mean, you had Matt Hughes, Tim Sylvia. I mean, he had the creme de la creme of most of his guys were champions. So,
well, you walked into that gym, and you saw all of those guys and more. You saw Rob Lawler, Drew McFerry, just tons of other guys. Famous ones, Rory McDonald, Jason Black, a room full of killers, absolute savages.
Was Jeremy Horn part of that crew?
Jeremy had already left by the time I was there. I had known Jeremy a little bit, and boy, you talk about another unbelievable guy who never gets the credit he deserves. Wow. He's had more fights than just about anybody, and he's fought everybody. He beat Chuck Liddell. Come on. And you hardly ever hear his name. He was good everywhere too. His submissions, he was like a wizard on the mat, and his stand-up was way better than what he ever got credit for too. But I saw him a little bit there, but he was I think in the process of moving out. I think he went to Utah. So, but yeah, and there was people you never heard of in there that were absolute monsters. They weren't famous, and they weren't maybe even competing. They were just there training, and they were giving these world champions fits in there. There was just a room full of beasts in there talking. If you don't get better in that room, it's because you walked out and left, and a lot of people walked out and left.
Oh, I would imagine. That was and Pat. He's a former. Pat Milich was the first welterweight champion of all time in the UFC, if I'm not mistaken. Him and Carlos, Carlos Newton.
Pat was the first 170-pound champion. Jens Pulver was the first 155-pound champion. Another guy who, You don't hear his name anymore. And he beat B.J. Penn. And we all hear B.J. Penn's name all over the place. Jens Pulver beat him for the title. Mm-hmm. You know, Jens had a bad run towards the end of his career, and that, you know, people kind of pushed him aside, maybe because of that, I don't know. But Jens was another one. He could box, he could wrestle, he was gritty and tough, he was always in shape. He hit really, I saw he was one of the smaller guys in the room, and I saw him chasing bigger guys all over that gym. They didn't want any part of him.
Oh, man, just to see, I mean, that is so cool to know that you went up there and was in that room during this time when you're kind of, you know, dealing with everything you're going through. Not many people that's watched UFC too that's seen that saying, I bet Fred Ettish is in there right now with Pat Milich and all those killers up there. So was that, when you were in that gym, was that getting the fire burning to say, hey, listen, I've got one more. I've got to have one more fight?
Well, I knew I could do it inside even before I went there because I believe that I'm better than what I showed at UFC 2. But I also am a realist, and I knew there was a lot of work to do on my ground game. So I tried to focus on all of that. But everything that happened to me, you know, and I don't want to make it sound like I was, you know, like a regular guy at Pat's. I wasn't living in Iowa. I don't want to misrepresent that. I went out there probably half a dozen times or so. But every time left an impression. Every time I learned something. I remember getting, well, I don't get knocked down easy, but Jason Black put me on one knee. we were sparring, and I didn't want to go in there and act like I was somebody who thought he was a badass. Right. Because I saw a guy that was down there that week who did walk around like he thought he was a badass. He was he said he was a special ops guy, Navy SEAL. He walked around with his shirt off all the time and little short shorts, and I didn't want to pretend that I didn't want to be that. I was there to learn. I was there to get better. And so we were doing some semi-controlled sparring, and I wasn't going hard enough. And I guess Jason decided that I needed to get taught a lesson in him. He popped me good, and I went down on one knee and got back up. And he basically told me quit fucking around and get serious. And I said, okay. So it's a fine line. You want to go hard, but you don't want to look like you're trying to be an asshole at the same time. Because this other guy was hard. Yeah, I saw Pat look at Drew McFedries and point to this other guy. And if you don't know who Drew was a killer. Yes. And Drew literally chased that guy all over that room. That guy was running, and Drew was chasing him and just pounding the piss out of him the whole way. And you know, I'm just not that way. I want to go in there. I want to work hard. I want to get better, but I don't want to be a dickhead at the same time. So
I know what you're saying, because I've been in situations where I've went into a sparring session and I don't want to get too active almost. I mean, I don't want to, you know what you can do, but you don't want to be too over aggressive, well, you would say.
Yeah, in that room, you didn't want to try and misrepresent yourself and, you know, be a jerk. You know, I just didn't want to be a jerk. And when I spar, I still spar today. You know, every Monday I spar, and everybody I spar, I think the closest guy in age to me is 25 years younger than I am, literally. And most of them are a lot bigger than I am. Right now, I wake up about 170 pounds in the morning. But I'll still go out there and I'll go with them as hard as, however hard the guy I'm sparring with wants to go, I'll try and match that. And what I try and explain to people, sparring is not fighting. You should spar to learn. You should spar to work on your weaknesses so that your weaknesses get stronger. And you don't go out there necessarily trying to beat the other guy. You go out there with a goal in mind. Okay, today I want to learn to move my head more. Okay, today I need it. For me, standing in the pocket is not what I do. I like to move and counter and employ strategy. So I need to stand in the pocket, and sometimes I got to try and stand in the pocket with guys that are a lot bigger than me. But that's what you do. But if there's a beginner in there, I'm not going to go hard and try and hurt the beginner, because what are you going to prove? First of all, you're proving that you're an asshole. You're not proving that you're good.
Right.
Second of all, you've got somebody there who wants to learn. They're there because they might be new. They want to try it out and get a taste for it. If you give them a bad taste, they're going to leave and they're not going to come back. Okay, so why would you do that? If you treat them decent, maybe they're going to stay. Maybe it will help them. And my idea is, ever since I was a kid, I started training when I was 12, 13 years old, something like that. And it saved me. It gave me, I had a bad childhood. I was badly abused as a kid. I didn't belong anywhere. I didn't fit in anywhere. I was a child of immigrant parents. My family exploded. I broken home. I was getting in trouble. I was getting kicked out of school. I was getting picked up by the police. But I started a martial arts class, and it was a hard class, but they made me feel welcome. And it saved me, because I quit doing drugs. I quit stealing. I quit being a derelict and a delinquent. So why, if I received that, why would I try and drive somebody away from that? Why would I not try and help somebody, a young person or an adult, to come and get the goodness that martial arts can give you, by being a jerk and going too hard with them and making them think, oh, this sucks, man. All they're going to do is beat me up. So sparring is different. I'll spar with beginners and I'll go just as light, and as long as they don't go crazy on me. I mean, if they start going crazy on me, you got to back them off a little bit. But,
and like you said, that is such a great point. Sparring, it ain't about trying to kill one another. It's about learning. I mean, head movement, keeping your hands up, footwork. I mean, go to the, going to the body, to the head. I mean, there's so many different ways to get better. And that's what it's about. Like you said, getting better. And I'm so glad you brought that up.
I tell people if you equate it to like going to school or college, when you're doing the drills, it's like classroom. When you're sparring, it's like the lab. Okay, so where you're taking the lessons that you learned in the classroom and you're experimenting with them to see what works, what doesn't work, what's got to change, what can get better. And then once you've done that and you graduate, you got to go out and go to work from school. But once you've graduated from the sparring, then you go and you do competition, if that's in your blood. So it's sequential. You have your lecture, your lab, and then the real worlds. And you can't skip steps, and you got to help people through each stage.
That's exactly right, man. I mean, it couldn't been said any better, Fred. So we have moved from UFC 2 through the middle. Through your tragic loss of your son. Now you've trained off and on. You've went out, made a few trips out to Iowa with Milich. When did you decide to fight? Because 53 years old, that's impressive, and in the fashion. Because let me tell you something: if you see the clips to this fight, Fred Ettish looks like he's 36, 37 years old. And he's bouncing around. There wasn't nobody on the planet that night he was going to fight whomever was in front of him at that point. I don't care if it's Gabriel Gonzaga. I don't care if it was Andre Roberts. You will take the fight to him that night. I didn't know who I was fighting. It was kind of almost like UFC 2 in that regard. I didn't know I was going to be fighting Johnny Rhodes. I just went in the cage and there he was. And they had trouble finding an opponent for me. I was fighting on a small show in Minnesota. My friend Brock Larson, who was also a UFC fighter and runs a successful gym and is one of the all-time great guys in the world. He had a promotion called CFX, Cage Fighting Extreme, and I asked him if he could find me a fight, and he said he would, and he did. But I think they had quite a time to try and find somebody, and it went back and forth, and finally, we came up with an opponent,
a young guy named Kyle Fletcher, who I still have contact with to this day through Facebook. A guy who, not unlike myself, had I think a pretty rough life and had some problems and difficulties, and who's now got himself straightened out from what I can see and what I hear, doing real well. But I owe Kyle Fletcher a lot because he took that fight. And when you think about it, he was in his early 20s. I was 53 years old. I was Fred Ettish, the guy who sucked so bad at UFC 2, according to so many people. And so if he won, well, the hell, Kyle, you beat up a 53-year-old guy. The guy's more than old enough to be your daddy. And he sucked when he was 38 years old in the UFC. So obviously he sucks worse now. Man, what are you doing beating up a senior citizen? And then if he loses, then he lost to that same guy. He lost to that same 53-year-old that could have been his daddy, who was supposedly no good. I've been called the worst martial artist to have ever fought in the UFC. That's a quote. The worst fighter that ever fought in the UFC. That's a quote. And so what did he have to gain? He had nothing. There was nothing for Kyle Fletcher to gain in that fight except for whatever they paid him. And it was a small show, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't a whole lot of money. So I owe Kyle Fletcher. He played a big part in me. I don't want to use the word redeeming myself because that makes it sound like, I wanted to show everybody, how good I am. No, I wanted to redeem myself in here.
For you.
Because I was dissatisfied. It was a ghost I couldn't put to rest. UFC 2 was in 1994. This fight was in 2009. It was 15 and a half years in between. And for 15 and a half years, I had this nagging, eating, gratingness inside of me and this voice inside of me that was just after me all the time. You've got to do better for you. I owed it to myself. I owed it to people who believed in me, like my students. And this is just in my mind. They never said that. My teachers, my family. That's what I was thinking inside. It wasn't for the people that were talking shit about me. I don't care about that.
Right.
I cared about that too much when it started. And I let that take too much of a toll on me. I let it beat me down. And that's ridiculous. That's stupid. When I look back at it now, I cannot believe how I let other people control me so much. They can't. It can't never happen again because I will never let anybody have that kind of control over me ever again. People ask me before the fight, "Oh, you're 53 years old. Well, what if the same thing happens that happened in UFC 2? And what are you going to do then?" I said, "So what? It's already happened once. I've been through it once. I know that road now, and I can travel it again if I have to, and I'll have a whole lot more experience and knowledge and wisdom to get through it. But I know that if I don't do it, this unrest inside of me will never go to sleep." And I told people I would rather die at 0-2 than 0-1. Because at 0-1, it means I got my ass kicked and I settled for that. And I didn't go back. And I was scared. And I was scared. But so what? There's a lot of things in life that scare us. What are we going to do? Back off every time something scares us? We're never going to get anywhere. We have to get beyond our fear. We have to control our fear instead of letting our fear control us. And so I faced my fear. I faced my anxiety. I faced all those demons from the past and said, I'm going to do this. I don't give a shit what anybody thinks. I'm going to go out there. And there were people telling me, don't do this. It's a mistake. No, there wasn't a mistake. I had to do it. I went it. I did it. Things went in my favor. And Now I'm 1-1. I can live with that. I still wanted fights after that, but again, always something came up, and it never worked out. And another thing is, when you think about it, 53 years old, an athletic commission licensed me to fight. I owe the Minnesota Commission a great debt of gratitude for that, because I know they took heat. I know they were under fire. What are you doing licensing this old guy to fight in a professional MMA fight? But they licensed me, they sanctioned the fight, and they let me do it. And I'm sure that after that, any other commission would have had a hard time licensing me to fight too. So back in my day, before that, there were no commissions, and so it was you get a promotion to sign you to fight, you fought.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, another thing I was wondering is, after you won in the first round, if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah.
right? Ground and pound,
Yeah.
was that how you won the fight?
Yeah.
Okay, so after the ref stops that, is there a moment where it almost feels like the weight of the world's off your shoulders inside, because that's something you wanted to do for you and your family and your students, but it wouldn't. I know what you're saying, that it's all in here, and it wasn't like you were telling them, I'm doing this for you, or, this and that. But that was what encouraged you and inspired you. Did you feel a lot better after that?
Yeah. There was a tremendous amount of anxiety leading up to it, but I controlled it this time instead of like last time. And I obviously at this time I had more time to prepare myself and to get my mind right. And of course, I imagine most fighters are this way. When I went in there, I had a vision in my mind of how I wanted to do. I really wanted to go out there, because I worked my ass off. I was 159 pounds going in there, and there was a miscommunication. I thought we were fighting at 165 pounds. Where I was staying, I didn't have a scale, so there's no way on God's green earth I'm not going to make weight. So I did everything leading up to weigh in, and I went up and I weighed in at 159, and I was like, wow. But the training that led up to that, I was it was Pat Milich inspired. I was running hills, I was running stairs, I was doing kettlebells, I was sparring hard, I was wrestling, I was doing jujitsu. I had guys grinding me and putting me in a pickle, where I had fresh guys on me all the time, putting me in terrible positions, and I had to survive those positions and get out of those positions, and it was grueling. But that's what I put my fighters through when I'm coaching, and I'm no better than they are. That's what I had to do, because I always told my guys, and I have to live up to the same thing. You make weight, you get in shape, you show up, you do your best, and you conduct yourself with dignity and honor when you're in that cage. And so that's what I had to do. So I had guys really put me in the pickles, and I wanted to show all that when I went in the cage. I wanted to show the well-roundedness. I wanted to look really good. And Kyle, he had kind of a different style about him. He wasn't a classically trained fighter, and so things were kind of awkward for me. And at some point, I just said to myself, screw it, man. I just got to win this fight. I'm gonna dick around and get caught with something, and I'm not letting that happen. And so that's when I ended up taking him down, got him out, and pounded him out. So that's,
man, such a great story, dude. And I mean, like, I've told people that, and this, like, for any sport, a kid goes through a hard time on the baseball field. A kid goes through a hard time on a ball court. And this happens. Parents of other kids talk crap about them. I mean, they're hearing negativity also. They're down on their self. But what can you do about it? You do what Fred Ettish did. You train, you do it for you, you come back, and you just fight. Basically, you fight, you prove yourself, and man, thank you for being on, number one. Can't thank you enough. And for a 67-year-old man, you are I'm going to bet you are the youngest looking 67-year-old man on the face of the earth right now. I can promise you that. You've got the fountain of youth over right now. I guarantee it.
I still work. I work hard every day. I live clean. I do the best I can because I love to be active. I love to do martial arts. I love to go out in my kayak and paddle, and I love to be able to do whatever I want to do, and to be able to do the things that I want to do them to the level that I like to do them at. I can't back off. So I'm up in the morning doing conditioning, do traditional martial arts. I do MMA 3 times a week. There's not a day goes by where I don't train, and that's, to me, that's when you get older, consistency is a key. You can't stop, because when you stop, it's cruel, because all your gains go away so fast. Getting them back is so hard, and if you get injured, it takes so much longer to heal. So you just have to stay consistent. You have to stay on top of it. Yeah, it takes, here and here, you've got to decide, there's a price to pay, because, man, maybe I don't feel like doing 100 push-ups, but by God, I'm going to do it. Maybe I don't feel like doing 100 squats, but I'm going to do it, because that's what it's going to take to keep me where I need to be, and help me improve. Maybe I don't want to spar that 225-pound, 30-year-old guy, because I know he's coming hard, and one of my goals in sparring is to be able to walk out and not have anything broken, and be able to work out again the next day. So, but I'm not going to back off from him either, because that's why I'm there, and that's what I love to do. So to be able to do all those things, I've got to stay young.
Well, man, so much respect and admiration to you, Fred. You're the second. This has kind of took off, like I said, man. This podcast, I've been blessed and fortunate enough to have 2 pioneers of mixed martial arts on here. And today I reached out to a couple more. I reached out to a whole bunch of people. 2 guys sit back, and I told everyone tonight that I would announce them during our conversation. I don't want to call it an interview, because I like to just talk. I like to converse with one another. So I figured I would go ahead before we've got. Actually, you ain't going nowhere just yet. I've got a few quick questions for you.
Oh, no worries.
So tonight, I'm announcing that Brad Kohler, former UFC fighter, will be joining me, and I think he had hernia surgery today. I got a hold of him right before he went into the hospital, and he said he would be glad.
Oh, yeah. I used to know Brad pretty well. I worked for Brad in Minnesota.
Man, Brad had one of the sickest knockouts still to this day.
Steve Judson, right hand, looked like he killed him.
Yeah, face first. I mean, It was. I mean, you could not stage that punch to look as good as it did.
That was on every opening for the UFC for quite a few years.
Oh yeah. And I'm glad to have him, because that, like you said, that was on the highlight reel for many, many years. And he also fought Babalu Sobral. He's fought some really good guys.
Yeah, he back in the day, Brad was pretty prominent in the MMA world as a fighter, and then he did a lot of promoting. He had some issues with some people, I understand, but I can't comment on that. Brad was good to me. He had me reffing and judging his shows when I was living in Minnesota. I even commentated on a show or two. And Brad, he always treated me right. I know a lot of people have problems with Brad, but Brad was good to me. So that's all I can say.
Well, I'm excited to have Brad, and I'm also excited to have this next guy that I'm about to announce. He came in, he beat Tank Abbott. He lost to Vitor Belfort, but this guy could wrestle. Scott the Pitbull Ferozzo had an attitude. He was a tough guy. He could swing, but he could also wrestle. He was a pretty good amateur wrestler also. But Scott the Pitbull Ferozzo, going to have him and Brad Kohler on in the next couple weeks. Man, I'm just really excited. I'm so glad, Fred, that you came on here, dude. I mean, you have just dropped some pearls of wisdom that I'm hoping and praying that some of these young guys, not just fighters, but young athletes, guys going through a dark time in their life, they can see it and they can say, listen, it ain't all going to stay that way. You know, it'll get better. But I figured I would draw. I want to ask you just a few questions here. The first one will be, who is your favorite fighter of all time?
Oh man, that's impossible to answer. There's too many of them. There's, I got to throw Pat Milich in there. Having a strong karate history that's still going on to this day, I've got to put Lyoto Machida in there when he was in his prime, because he was so good and he moved so well. Prime Anderson Silva was just a beautiful thing to watch. Today's fighters, Charles Oliveira, how can you not love this guy?
Love Charles, love Bronx, man.
He had some setbacks, and he didn't let that stop him, and look at him now.
That's why I love his story so much. Love it.
I tell you, another one that to me, even though she had a real close one last time, is Valentina Shevchenko. I am such a fan of hers, because she is so unbelievably great at everything. Everybody looks at her as a striker, but hey, her ground game has won her some fights too. And she to me, she's amazing. I really enjoy watching her. I could go on and on. Jeremy Horn, like I said, he's under the radar, but look at what he did as a fighter. Genki Sudo, an old school guy. I used to love to watch him.
He would wear the mask out, wouldn't he?
Yeah. There's just too many for me to narrow down to just one. Marco Ruas, when he fought UFC a couple of times, I always was real high on him. I thought he was great.
The king of the streets, Marco Ruas. Think about the guys he's taught, in his camp. Pedro Hizzo, Babalu. Yep. I mean, he's had a couple guys that could, Hizzo was right there, man, at the top of the mountain with Randy. Randy Couture. They fought twice, and a lot of people thought Hizzo should have won that first fight.
Yeah. No, he was a beast. He was definitely the elite of the elite.
All right, what's your favorite movie, Fred?
Tombstone's got to be up there. 300, the original Rocky. Now, those would be up in consideration.
What about your favorite food?
Sushi.
All right, so if you had a chance to pick your walkout music for your next fight, what would you choose?
I'd choose the same one I chose in 2009, TNT by AC/DC.
TNT, man, you can't go wrong with Bon Scott and AC/DC.
But I tell you what, AC/DC, I don't know why people don't use it. Hell's Bells, Thunderstruck, TNT.
You could just take their CD and have a different song for each. I mean, if you're doing it like a local promotion and you don't have the internet, just put AC/DC live in, and each guy can come out with any song.
When I listen to TNT now, still the hair on the back of my neck gets all tingly still.
Oh gosh, I know the feeling. The same way with John Mellencamp's "Crumbling Down." They're just certain songs. That was my walkout music. And any time that I'm training down here on the bag or lifting weights, when that one comes on, you get that itch back. But it's best not to scratch it at my. Well, Fred, you know what, man? Thanks for joining us. I appreciate your support of the Bears Den. Your story is one of my favorites of all time, and I'm not just bullspitting you. That's the truth, man. I respect you so much, and look at you, man. 67 years old, in awesome condition, kayaking, sparring through the week. My goodness. Send me some of that fountain of youth over here to Eastern Kentucky, dude.
Well, you're living in a part of the world I want to come visit anyway, so.
Oh, boy, dude. You come over, we'll rent us some kayak.
You now ask me my favorite TV series.
Tell me, hey, what is it?
Justified, Harlan County.
Oh, gosh, that's a good one, man. That is.
Man. I don't watch much TV, and it's hard to get me interested in anything, but I was hooked on that. I'm watching it on Hulu for the third time now. So,
and you know what? That hits close to home. That's pretty. It's pretty well accurate of how that is. I'm just a few counties away from Harlan, so
yeah.
So I figured if you south of us.
Yeah, if you were in East Kentucky, I figured you had to be pretty close to there. But that show was so extraordinarily, everything about it was good. The storylines were good. They were complicated, but you could follow them. The character development was amazing. The dialogue, and it never got boring. It never got stupid. All 6 seasons just were really tip top. So.
You know, Walter Goggins, man, he done such a wonderful job on that show. I mean, yeah. You got Timothy Oliphant. I mean, Joel, they just all did such a good job. And I'll tell
there
you,
was no weak link in that show. Everything about it was good.
I'll tell you another really good show, and I'm telling you, I mean, I hate to keep you on here for a little bit longer, but did you ever see True Detective with Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey?
I don't know. I did not.
That is like I said, it came out in 2013, and I just never had got the chance to check it out. And I took off I got COVID. I think I got COVID like a year and a half ago. So I was quarantined at the house, and I finally got a chance. Man, I hadn't been hooked on a TV show like that in forever. So if you ever get quarantined or anything, check out True Detective on Prime.
Yeah, well, so far COVID's been running away from me. I haven't got it, so.
It's a hot spot here again. A lot of the kids at the local schools are getting it. It's not as severe as the symptoms aren't as severe, but it's almost like it's more contagious right now. Which school just started back, so all the kids are sick.
Yeah, well, schools are the great incubator for anything like that, and it travels through there like wildfire. But but when I was working, I was working with homeless people, and we had them. We had a campus where we were housing people, and I was rolling around in COVID every single day in my job because I was all over the whole campus, and I was partly in charge of keeping everything clean and sanitary, and I never got as much as a runny nose. So,
well, I tell you what, man, tougher than a $2 steak is Fred Ettish. I'll tell you what, Fred, thank you for joining me, a Wild Time podcast. Subscribe, like. And thank you guys, man. Thanks for everybody for tuning in. And thanks to Fred Ettish and Guy Mesger this week for joining us. UFC 2 vet, UFC 4, UFC 5. Well, Guy went on to fight a few times. But
yep.
Love having the early guys, man. The early pioneers, the guys that had the guts and fortitude to come out. I mean, it's just can't thank you enough, Fred. Keep up the good work. Keep training those guys. Keep kayaking. And don't my man.
All right, thank you so much.
All right, no problem. See you, buddy.